Over the past few weeks, Space Engineers 2 has had a lot of new blocks added, and also has received many dev diaries showing what the developers are currently working on for the game. So first we'll take a look at these new blocks, and then we'll take a look at the dev diaries and go through all the exciting details that are in them. The first block we'll be looking at is this, the door. Previously the door just had a hole in it, and now you can see it has a door in it. And if we walk open to the door and press the control panel, it opens, and we press it again and it closes. Now it isn't fully feature complete, as you can just walk through the door, but I'm sure people are well adjusted enough to have a normal reaction to this. They added this truss block here, which as you can imagine you can just walk through it, and obviously this is a cosmetic block for detailing. They added the connector, which much like the door isn't fully functional, but this is kind of understandable as we know that docking in Space Engineers is going to be automated, that you just fly near a connector and then your ship will automatically line up and dock. So it's understandable that the connector isn't functional because that part of it isn't done yet. I also wish I had footage of that. I have seen footage of it, I know that it exists, I just can't find it anywhere. They've added the O2H2 generator, which as you can see, spins. And like with the rest of these blocks, it's cosmetic only because there's nowhere to store hydrogen and oxygen at the moment. But they're giving us these blocks now so we can future-proof our builds for when survival drops in the future. Conveyors were the thing that was most asked for when the game was released, and they were the first things added. A working door was pretty high up there, so that was added next. And it seems like every time the visuals for a block is done, they're added to the game. They also added the ore detector, which also spins, and I'm hoping that's a running theme for future Space Engineers blocks, because as I always say, I love spinning things. But the true secret is, I just like blocks that are interactive like this, where they can move, or if I can open things on them, any kind of stuff like that. Like the assembler you can see in the background. I hope that little arm in the middle moves as it assembles, as it just makes the game feel so much more alive than just the static of the blocks that are in Space Engineers 1. And before you ask, no, the ore detector does not act as a rotor. Standing on it does not spin you around, and you can also not place blocks on top of it. And whilst I didn't expect it, this week they've added hydrogen thrusters to the game, which you can see here have 3 different sizes, 0.5 meter, 2 meter, and 2.5 meter. And I have to say, the models on these look absolutely exquisite. They are some of the nicest thrusters I have ever seen. I've placed one on the back of Apollo here so you can have a look how it works in action. But also I can press the button on my door to open it. Wow, look at that immersion. So you can see, so if I fly forward now, you can see there is a fire effect. And I'm going to hazard a guess that the effect on this thruster might not be finished, because this looks almost identical to the fire effect that shows up when you damage a block. So I'm guessing they have one team that does all the models, and they finished the model for the hydrogen thruster, so they've added it to the game. But potentially whoever does the emissives hasn't done that part yet, which probably means this is something that will be changing in the future, unless I'm completely wrong on that. But it doesn't quite look like how I'd imagine a thruster looks, but maybe I'm just too Space Engineers 1 pilled. This week they've added the bed to the game, which you can see here, which has a peculiar slot on the side for some sort of cable. You can't sleep in it or anything, like most of the blocks in the weekly updates are just cosmetic, but I think the bed is a very good example of how building will be completely changed in Space Engineers 2. Obviously in Space Engineers 1 we have a couple different variants of beds, normal beds, inset beds, the barrack bed you can see here, but in Space Engineers 2 you don't need any of that because you can just build your own bed variants. In a couple of seconds I was able to slap together this basic bunk bed. I have also realised I placed them in the opposite direction to each other, but shush. This is still a very good example of how the building in Space Engineers 2 is going to be so much better. Now these aren't the only blocks added, they've also added many different slope variants to the game. A lot of these you could actually build out of the blocks that were currently in the game, but obviously having a block version of that makes it much simpler to place down. And also in the future we'll use less PCU, and again this was another thing that was heavily requested by the community that's been added to the game. But that's all the new blocks out of the way, so let's take a look at what is coming in the future. So, dev diaries. There's been 5 since I last covered Space Engineers 2, and normally I do it in some sort of logical order, but there's so much to go through. I think I'm just going to do it in chronological order, starting with the oldest one and going towards the newest one. In the first dev diary, we got concept art for what is going to be one of the main characters in Space Engineers 2, belonging to a faction called the Legion of Engineers. And as you can see, it appears quite Roman in design. And also it's a very pretty suit, very pretty. I want it, I need it, especially if it's blue and gold. I believe, I don't know at the moment, but I believe this is the character that voices the trailers for Space Engineers 2, called Dante Appian. He's mentioned many times in the loading screens of the game as the consul of the Legion of Engineers, which sounds like their leader. And if he's going to be a main character and belongs to this faction, that sounds like this is who it could be. The loading screens also mention Marie Gaia, who was a previous leader of the Legion of Engineers, so maybe it's her, we'll have to see. But we know very little about this faction generally, other than the fact that it seems to be very Roman themed, so we'll leave this for now. Because they're working on survival at the moment, there's some interesting details about some changes and improvements to building that will be coming in the future. One of these things is tentatively called block packages, and this is the idea that rather than assembling lots of different components, you can assemble a block package which contains all of the components in it. For example, you assemble a gyroscope block package which contains all of the gyroscope's components in it, and it appears in your inventory as a block package of a gyroscope, and that way you know you have exactly the resources to build 3 gyroscopes in your inventory rather than you having to sit there and count, or alternatively try and weld blocks and realise you don't have enough components. The component system is still there, this is just a quality of life addition. Backpack building, which we knew brief bits about before, is a system where in the early game you can harvest resources with your drill, and those resources go into your backpack, and then your backpack has the facility to automatically convert those resources into early game components. So say you mine some stone or some iron ore, that then goes in your backpack, and then you can automatically create steel plates to place down basic blocks. Now, as we'll come to later, this doesn't allow you to place every single block in the game. The backpack is not replacing the assembler, refinery and other blocks, it's just to remove that reliance on the survival kit at the beginning of the game. We were told before that when you're in survival, the blocks that you place will be projections, so you'll be able to visualize the full block rather than the frame, and then it will only become a frame once you start welding it up. The idea being that you can fully visualize what you want to build and then weld it up afterwards. And to go with this, in Space Engineers 2, when you place a block as a projection, it is automatically added to your build planner, so that you can go over to an inventory and then automatically withdraw the components that you need. And this is going to be so useful for survival, as you'll no longer have to place a block, right click it with your welder to add it to the build planner, and then go over to the inventory. That extra step has now been removed. These aren't the only quality of life improvements that we know are coming to survival. There's another one we're going to speak about in a minute, but I think all of these changes are really important as the beginning of Space Engineers is way more difficult than it needs to be. The number of people that play the first hour of Space Engineers and are immediately put off by the early game grind is probably a lot more than you think it is. I have tutorials on my channel, and I get a lot of comments like, well, this sucks, I give up. And those are only a fraction of the people that actually believe this, because those are the ones that comment. Imagine how many people play the game for the first time or watch a tutorial about the game and go, nah, I think I'm alright. Making these processes more accessible, especially in the early game, because the early game is the hardest part of Space Engineers. Once you get past that, it's all free sailing from there. So simplifying these processes, making it much more user-friendly, will go a massive way to making this game more accessible to new players. And will also make me much more willing to start a new survival game. Hand welders will have the option to weld in a radius in Space Engineers 2. This is going to have to be the case regardless of how you feel about it, because can you imagine welding up each of those individual 25cm blocks? I think you would lose your mind within minutes. We haven't actually seen this in action yet. We have seen area grinding, which we'll discuss in a minute, but area welding we haven't seen yet. I'm going to assume that maybe this is an upgrade thing, where the basic welder can only weld up a single block, and the second tier welder has the ability to weld a small area of blocks. And then, I don't know how many tiers there'll be, but I assume each tier will be able to weld a bigger area, but I'm going to imagine that's an ability, and that the default option to be weld the block you're looking at, and maybe you can right click to weld an area or something. Actually, maybe it'll have the little radial menu like the paint gun, where you can choose the size of the area that you weld. We have recently shown this block here, the smelter, and what insightful comment do you think Zero is going to say about the smelter? What do you think he's going to say about it? Is it maybe that it looks really cool? Is it maybe that it has these weird modules at the top that the assembler and the refinery also have, that we're not quite sure what they do, but it seems very likely they're attached to some sort of upgrade system? Maybe it's to comment on the beautiful destruction that this block has, like many of the other blocks in the game. Or maybe he's going to comment on the fact that this element spins on the left, and that he loves spinning things. We actually discussed the smelter before in a previous video. It was in the files for the game as a reference for all the recipes that the components in the game have. In that video we go through each of the components and the blocks that are used to create them, the smelter, the assembler, the refinery and the fabricator, and assuming those recipes that are in the code are correct, and also the description of the video at the smelter confirms this, the new production blocks form an assembly line as components are needed to craft other components. So the smelter can craft components, and then those components are needed to craft components in the assembler, and then you use components from the assembler to build the refinery. The refinery then makes components that the assembler can make use of to make even more components, and then the refinery's components and the assembler's components are needed to craft components in the fabricator. So presumably you're going to need all 4 of these machines to make all the components in the game. In that video I went over a second ago, I went into much more depth about this, about all the components and the machines needed to craft them, so check that out if you're interested. But there is one more thing to mention about the smelter, and that's the smelter converts raw resources directly into components. It's not like Space Engineers 1 where you put the ore into a refinery and get the ingots out from it. You put iron ore into the smelter and you get steel plates out. Now it's worth noting this is also how the backpack works. You have ore in your inventory, or presumably stone as well, and it converts it directly into a steel plate. But if the code in the game is correct, the smelter is more efficient than the backpack and uses less ore in order to make a component. I've seen a lot of people take issue with the fact that ingots won't be in Space Engineers 2, and I'll say 2 quick things on that. 1, hopefully you've realised based on everything I've just said that the removal of ingots isn't keen trying to simplify crafting in Space Engineers 2. If anything, it's going to be much more complicated, with you having to manage all the different components in the different machines, and also with the components being used in the recipes of more advanced components. And 2, just chill out for a minute. I'm sure, given the reaction everyone had to the simple uttering of removing ingots from the game, that Keen will fully explain the new crafting process very soon. What I've just mentioned is just what's in the code for the game. There's blocks like the Gear Forge that we don't know how they play into the new crafting process. And based on the description of the Smelter video, it sounds like production blocks work completely differently to Space Engineers 1 anyway. So I'm sure that Keen is working on something at the moment to explain exactly how everything works. So relax, take a deep breath, and be patient. I'm sure we'll find out soon enough. The next developer diary has this video you can see here of water, and you can see how much better the water looks than the weird like plasticky jelly thing we were shown before. And also you can see that when they go into the water, they are particles to give the effect of splashes and ripples. And there's a bit here, let me go forward a little bit, where these effects look so good. You see here as they reverse, where there's like the trail of foam behind them. That looks great. Obviously this is all still work in progress, it's not perfect yet. There are a couple of images and videos in a minute that show water looking even better than this already. But I love water teasers, every time I see them I get so excited. So I just have to show you guys, as I know some of you share my excitement of water teasers as well. It's also good to show them working on water, as this demonstrates one of the big things of Space Engineers 2, that they're working on multiple things at once. The next major update for the game will be Vertical Slice 1.5, which is modding, and that should be coming out soonish, but we'll discuss that in a minute. And then after that is the big update, Survival and Planets. That's Vertical Slice 2. And then after that is Water, Vertical Slice 3. And they're working on all 3 of these things simultaneously. So when you're sitting there going, why are they working on this? Why are they working on that? We want survival, give us survival. They are working on survival. They're working on water as well. They're doing all these things at the same time. Doing one of these things isn't taking away from another, so just be patient. It'll all be here before you know it. The next dev diary is mostly about modding, and whilst I've never modded Space Engineers before, I've been told by other modders that some of these changes are pretty major. There was a video released on the Space Engineers newsletter a couple of days ago, which shows the new modding tools in action, and apparently these modding tools are the same ones the developers are using to create the game. So in theory, modders will have the same power as the developers do to create mods. And in the dev diary, they show off the modding tools by creating a thruster that is also a gyroscope and also a light, which apparently wasn't possible in the game before. Without very complex scripting, you could only create blocks of one type. They also show this screenshot here of character modding with no context. There was very little character modding in Space Engineers 1. I think there was a couple of mods that replaced and updated the character, but I don't recall it being very popular. But presumably character modding is going to be much simpler in Space Engineers 2, like all modding is supposed to be. And presumably this suit here is an example of that, where it's a grey suit with bronze highlights. In fact, I think it has the Keen logo on the knee of the engineer, so potentially this is the new Keen suit. Developers have access to the Keen Pajamas skin in Space Engineers 1, so maybe this is the Space Engineers 2 version of that. Anyway, after this update drops, if any modders want to hit me up, we can discuss making a custom suit for me, one with lots of cables. There's also this screenshot here, this is unrelated to modding, which shows off concept art for welders and a wind turbine. I think the wind turbine is a drawn piece of art, and I believe some of the welder concept art is AI generated, so I'm not necessarily sure how representative this will be of anything in the game. Potentially the bottom ones are drawn and the top ones are AI generated. I don't know, we'll have to see. There's a large section about how survival will work in Space Engineers 2, so before we get to that, let's have a look at some flora, specifically underwater flora. You can see here we have all kinds of different seaweeds and coral. I'm sure some botanist in the comment section is going to tell me the exact kind of plants these are, but they do look very, very good. Especially these on the left with the engineer next to them. These really tall bits of seaweed. Those look real good. Can you imagine piloting your submarine between these massive bits of seaweed sticking up? It's going to look great, isn't it? Based on information in game, it seems like underwater exploration is going to be a big part of Space Engineers 2, so we might be seeing a lot more of this underwater flora than we think. Right, there is a very, very, very long section about how gameplay is going to work in Space Engineers 2, specifically about survival, progression, and what we're going to do in this new game. So I'm just going to read it to you, because it means I don't need to make a million graphics for it. The heart of Space Engineers 2's gameplay is the new colonization system. As a British person, I approve. We've divided the Almagest solar system into distinct regions, each offering unique resources, challenges, and opportunities. As you complete missions and establish infrastructure in these areas, you'll increase your colonialization index, a measure of humanity's foothold in this distant star system. This creates a clear and visible progression path whilst maintaining the sandbox freedom that defines Space Engineers. There's a bunch of information down here about things you'll be doing, so engineering projects, missions, encounters, like building a power station, establishing a mining outpost, defending against threats, and stuff like that. And these all fit together with colonizing this new star system. You'll be guided to these objectives via missions, HUD indicators, and objective panels, so there'll always be something new to do. And the idea will be that this will give you a lot more to do, so you're not just sitting around waiting, which is quite a lot of Space Engineers, and progression will be tied to this in some sort of degree. But, of course, if you don't want to do any of this, if you don't want to do missions, if you don't want to do encounters and stuff, you can just do what you did before and just play Space Engineers like a sandbox. It's all up to what you want to do. It mentions down here that unlocking blocks is tied to your colonization progress, so the more you build and the more stuff you do, the more blocks that you'll be able to build. But it sounds like these aren't generic blocks, but these are instead specialized blocks for specific regions. So we know there's a water planet in Space Engineers 2. Maybe doing stuff on the water planets gets you better underwater thrusters and stuff like that. There's a brief mention here that they're currently considering adding role-based specialization paths, so they mention the Explorer, Engineer, Pilot and Industrialist, but they don't go into much detail of what these do, and as they're considering it, these might not make it to the final game anyway. And all of these changes come with the main aim of Space Engineers 2 being a game that will be easy to learn, but difficult to master. So the start of the game will be much easier, but the building and engineering at the end game will be much more complicated, which sounds pretty much like what I want Space Engineers 2 to be. At the bottom of this post there's also 2 videos. One of these videos shows off the grinding effects, which are still work in progress, and we get one of the best looks I think we've seen so far of the grinder in game. And I've just gone into teaser mode and I'm trying to work out what this block behind is. It's probably a block in the game, but I don't recognise the Space Engineers 2 blocks enough at the moment to tell you. And it's also worth noting you can see the block in front of the engineer is ground down, but also the block on the right is also ground down. So like the welder, it appears that the grinder also has an AoE effect. Presumably the higher tiers of grinder have the ability to weld in an area, with also the ability to precisely grind a single block as well. In the next dev diary, we're told that modding should be completed this week, which was 2 weeks ago, so presumably it's done now, and they normally take about a month to test these updates before they release them, so expect modding to be released in the next 2 or so weeks. And they've said after modding is released, everyone will be shifting their focus to Vertical Slice 2, which is Planets and Survival. They mention a bunch of features that have been implemented into Survival, and they've also mentioned that the Q&E feature of the ship rolling isn't currently implemented properly, and that they have now fixed that. If you've played since they implemented the new flying system in Space Engineers 2, you'll notice that rolling your ship is a bit weird. It's very strong compared to all the other movement of the ship, so I'm glad to see that this has been fixed. And I'm also pretty sure that dampeners are too strong in Space Engineers 2, as you come to pretty much a dead stop as soon as you take your finger off the thrust, so I assume that's something they'll also be looking at? Maybe I've just got way too many thrusters on Apollo, I don't know. There's a couple of videos showing off clouds. This one is in space. As you can see in the top right, these clouds are not done, but they look very good. I very much like how they look. And it also appears that there is some sort of, I guess, deserty biome here, so the clouds never actually cover that biome, which is really interesting. Obviously, I assume that's how it works in real life. I've never been to a desert, so I can't tell you. But it's interesting to see that these clouds are biome persistent. There's also this video of clouds here, and they look very good, don't they? I'm not sure how finished they are at the moment, but they just look great. I assume we start in a desert as there's very little cloud cover here, and then when we move over the mountains there's much bigger and more dense clouds, and they look so good. I want to fly up into a cloud. I want to have a space battle in the cloud. Please, Keen, please. There's a large section of this dev diary that talks about the core loops and progression of the game, and one of the main focuses of Space Engineers 2 is to make the early game much easier, with the idea that you'll be able to construct your first ship in a couple of minutes rather than the hours it can take in Space Engineers 1. Think new player, not 10,000 hours, slap a drill onto the bottom of the survival pod and fly around with 3 thrusters. And the idea will be, as the game goes on, the game will get more and more complex and challenging, rather than, as we've mentioned before, where the beginning is the most challenging part, and after that you're just clean sailing all the way along. This also seems to tie in with the component stuff we mentioned earlier, where the early game components just require the ore to craft, but the higher tier components require multiple machines making multiple different prerequisites to make them. But of course, more experienced players won't be forced down any paths. If you want to build a drill on the bottom of a pod with 3 thrusters, go for it. This is Space Engineers, it's a sandbox, you can do whatever you want. This is just focusing on removing the grind from new players of the game. As we mentioned before, you can accept missions, presumably from NPCs because we know they're coming. You travel to a location and you solve various challenges, exploration, combat, engineering, and then you receive rewards for completing them. It also mentions in this dev diary that there'll be a visual map showing the regions of the Almagest system that you've colonized, which is a very strong word, but nevertheless, having a map in the game that visualizes where you've been, or just visualizes the game in general, will be so good. I actually think this will be a very, very big deal for the game, as having a map and just seeing where things are will give players so much guidance. We know that Delphos, the brown dwarf, is going to be at the center of the solar system, and then have the other planets around it. So just having a map that visualizes that for players, it will immediately go, oh, I really want to visit the water planet. Oh, I really wanted to visit the dwarf star. Or maybe it will show you where all the space stations are, and you'll be able to just fly to one rather than flying along and thinking, when is a space station going to appear on my HUD? Anything to remove the marker system from Space Engineers 1. Anything. And it also reiterates that if you know Space Engineers 2, you can place whatever blocks you want, you'll be fine. All these new systems are more for guiding new players through the game and also giving you a lot more to do than just build a ship and then fight the endgame encounters. This dev diary came out last week, and this one is very, very interesting. So to start off with, they have the familiar dam that we've seen in many, many videos and screenshots of Space Engineers 2, and you can see there is a new addition to the screenshot. Trees. Lots and lots of trees. Now, obviously this is just for testing because there are trees in the water down here and there are trees over here in the water and then clipping through the building. This is just a visual test of how trees are working in Space Engineers 2. And I have to say, despite the fact this is just a test image, it looks very, very good. I hope we do get forests that are as dense as this one in Space Engineers 2, as this would definitely be a big shake-up compared to the first game. You can also see that the water has massively improved in quality in this screenshot as well. And also the dam is looking much better. Obviously someone's taking the time to properly detail this. Also, there's a ship down here with lots of red lights on. I'm not really sure what that's about, but it's way too small to tell. There's a brief video that shows a debug look at water, and unfortunately due to YouTube's bitrate, it is absolutely destroyed in quality. Congrats, you get to look at the double bitrate destroyed version. But the main takeaways of this is that water has much better performance than it previously did. It's much more dynamic, as you can see here as little bits of it come off as it's placed, and the resolution of the water simulation has been increased, so it has a lot more detail than before, along with the performance improvements. You can also see these screenshots here of the dam with the debug water on the right hand side. I'm sure this all means something, but I'm currently looking at how much better the screenshot looks on the left. They've done a lot of work to overhaul the terrain here. Obviously the trees aren't here, but it is looking a lot better. And you can also see the water flowing out of the dam and it looks very good. Obviously it's missing its particle effects. There should be the foam here that isn't here, but presumably they've disabled that to show the comparison with the wireframe on the other side. The wireframe here doesn't completely represent the water on the other side. Oh wait, there is no water on the other side, it's flowing out. Okay, I see, I understand. Thank you for telling me, comment section, I already got it. There's a screenshot here of a canyon and wow, this looks incredible. I don't necessarily know if this is an in-game render, but if this is what they planned for Space Engineers 2 to look like, I'm completely sold. As I said before, Pertam is my favourite planet, and the reason is because it has details in it like ravines like this, and this looks just 10 times better than that already. The Earth-like planet in Space Engineers 2 is called Verdure, and Verdure seems to have deserts, it seems to have canyons, it seems to have forests, it seems to have plains, it seems to have mountains, and they all look so good. So I am very excited to see the biome diversity in Space Engineers 2. It's one of my biggest criticisms of the Earth-like planet in Space Engineers 1. It just has a big band of greenery in the middle with mountains around the top, and then snow right at the top. So I am very excited to whatever Space Engineers 2 is going to bring. There's a screenshot here of water thrusters, which are presumably thrusters to use on a submarine or something like that, or a boat. They've got a propeller on them, so they must spin, so I'm already sold. It's probably nothing, it's probably a concept art thing, but I do think it's very interesting there's a guy swimming here. Is there going to be swimming in Space Engineers 2? For the player, I mean. Very interesting. And the final video in this dev diary is this image here of some underwater plants, presumably swaying in the ocean's current. Obviously this is in space for debug purposes, but you know what I mean. And these look like they're so dynamic. I don't think there's anything in Space Engineers 1 that's like this. Grass and trees kind of sway a little bit, but nothing to the degree of this. With stuff like this being added underwater, I 100% think there is stuff for us to do underwater. Theory time with Zero, I'm 100% convinced that there is something in the middle of Byblos, the water planet in Space Engineers 2. There's going to be something in the core. I don't know what it is, but a lot of the loading screens hint at there being some sort of secret in the depths of Byblos. So I am so convinced there is going to be underwater something down there. Ancient Leviathans, literally Subnautica 2 in Space Engineers. This week's dev diary includes a couple of things. For starters, the developers are promoting a community tool called Space Editor, and Space Editor is a tool made by fans of the game to allow you to tweak different aspects of it. So currently it allows you to change keybinds and remove PCU limits, and I'm sure in the future it will gain more features as well. I know there are some people that don't use WASD to move around, they have to have completely different controls in order to play the game. So for those people holding off for that reason, you can try this tool and get into the game now. But of course these features will make their way into the game. I won't be surprised if keybinds is probably coming alongside modding, if not the update after that. We received this image here, which says Procedural World Generation at the top and shows this image below. And before you get too excited, Procedural World Generation specifically refers to asteroids, as planets in Space Engineers 1 and 2 are going to be set and they have the same landmarks, the same geography. And personally I think this is better because this allows them to have that personal touch, which is especially present in Pertam, which as I said earlier has all these ravines and canyons. But one of the things that's fun about Pertam is it's very clear that Pertam used to have an ocean on it. You can see by this geography this is area that is dry, but used to be some sort of seabed. And you don't get that kind of detail on a randomly generated planet, you only get that on one that is created with the human hand. But back to the screenshot, you can see that they're using procedural generation to place a ring around this planet here, Chemic, and they can configure the width and the height of the ring, and also the inner boundary radius, which I'm presuming is the area that isn't asteroids. So this could be something they're testing, or potentially Chemic will have an asteroid ring around it. I'll be curious to see how asteroid rings look at a distance. Obviously at a certain distance asteroids aren't rendered anymore. It'll be interesting to see if there is an asteroid ring around a planet, if it will display some sort of distant texture so you can still see the ring at a distance, or maybe if the ring's thin enough you won't see it anyway and it won't matter too much. There's also an option at the bottom here for asteroid fields. There's not really much more to glean from this other than the fact you can set the size and the rotation of the field. It'd be interesting to see if in Space Engineers 2 asteroids are in clusters rather than just being everywhere like they are in Space Engineers 1. I think I would prefer that. I think that would make space much more interesting. It would give space biomes effectively, where different areas of space have different details to them. So some areas have lots of asteroids and then some areas are just big empty open spaces and stuff like that. And the last thing to draw your attention to on this screenshot is at the bottom here. I don't know how well this is going to come through in the video because it's very low resolution, but you can see it says icy asteroids, obviously, makes sense. There was icy asteroids in Space Engineers 1, and fiery asteroids. Very interesting. Is this just asteroids that are on fire, or is this asteroids with like a volcanic texture? We know that there's volcanic textures in the files for the game, so maybe it's that? We'll have to wait and see. There is this video here which shows off the water effects again, and there's not really a description of this video other than the fact that it's an experimentation. So what I think it's trying to show is that there are points of this video where this ship is underwater, and you can see the trail of foam follows the size and shape of what is actually sticking out of the water rather than the whole ship. I will say, I think this looks worse than the previous water teaser we looked at, where the foam was larger, yes, but I think overall it looked better. I think it's the gaps in it that make it look weird. It'd be nice to know exactly what they're trying to show off or test in this teaser, as I would know exactly what I'm supposed to be paying attention to. I'm still very confident in water. Everything we've seen so far has looked really good. And whatever this is, it's still work in progress, so I'm sure it'll improve in the future. A couple of things in this dev diary are reiterated things that we've mentioned already in this video. However, one new thing they refer to is a repair HUD, which seems to be very similar to the changes they've made to the projector in Space Engineers 1, where the projector is capable of marking missing and unfinished blocks. However, one thing that seems to be different about this is it says the game compares your current grid against the original blueprint or save snapshot. And what I'm hoping this means is that when your ship is finished, you can place the projector on your ship, or however you do it, and you can just save a snapshot of that ship. And then the projection it works with is just the one at that time, because currently you have to blueprint the ship, paste it in the projector, line it up. There's a lot of extra steps there that can be cut out. So fingers crossed this is how it works. And if it's not, hey Keen, if you're listening, wink wink, nudge nudge. The last few things on this dev diary focus on the improvements to terrains and voxels. As you can see in this video here, they're toggling this feature on and off, and as they do, the quality of the voxels goes from quite a smooth texture to a more detailed one. You can see the effect much more back here, as it goes from quite a smooth cliff face to a more detailed looking realistic one. And then there's 4 screenshots showing improvements to voxel textures. The screenshot you can see on the left is before, and you can kind of do a bit of trickery in Space Engineers 2 to spawn in planets in the game, and they kind of look like this, a bit flat. But on the screenshot on the right, you can see they've massively improved the quality of the textures, and it just looks so much better now. On the left looks like a video game, and on the right it just looks so much more realistic. This one here is more of the same, and I think one of the things that makes the most difference on these is sure, the cliff faces look better, sure the rocks look more like rocks, but it's the little detail in between the rocks where you can see there's sand going through them. Obviously this is a sandy biome and sand gets blown around, and the fact that between the areas where there's actually rock, there is sand in between them is just a detail that elevates the appearance of the game so much. This one is probably the best example, as you can see how massively the appearance of the textures has been improved. On the left you've just got a flat grey and then a flat green, and on the right it just looks so much better. The transition between the green and the grey, it's just improved so much. You can see the greenery is on the flat areas where it's actually able to grow, and then where it's more vertical there's much less greenery, but there still is greenery, life is still able to get there, but for the most part it's entirely plain. And I think it's also worth noting, you've got this area at the bottom here which is entirely grey, and I'm pretty sure this is where water is supposed to be. Presumably this is Verdure, which is our Earth-like planet, and we know that water is going to be on it when water releases for Space Engineers 2, so presumably this is a cliff face next to the ocean, and water is supposed to be down here at the bottom of the cliffs. And then we have this final screenshot. You can see again the textures have been improved, and it's not just the textures, you can see the placement of them has been improved. As over here on the cliff face you can just see there's solid green, and on the right you can see there is a more rocky texture here instead, as this is on an incline and it's less likely for greenery to grow up there. There's one more thing I want to mention before we move on, and that's this section here, where they talk about playing the survival mode and making sure everything works, and they talk about backpack building here in a note, and that backpack building is only used for early game blocks, and that later stages require manufactured components and or block wrappers, which they may talk about next time. As I said earlier, after the outcry about ingots not being in Space Engineers 2, I said they were very likely in the future to talk about how production works in the game, and this seems to indicate that this will be coming soon. So like I said, chill out, just be patient, I'm sure all will be revealed before you know it. So as I said earlier, modding is probably coming very soon, and when it does, I'll be covering it and everything else added in that update. And then of course we have the push to survival. If you want to keep up to date with everything going on with Space Engineers 2, and also there's some very interesting things happening in Space Engineers 1 at the moment, they're adding food to the game, if you can believe it. So don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel if you want to see everything to do with Space Engineers 2. And also a special thanks to my supporters whose names you can see on the left.